Why do drug-addicted persons keep using drugs?
I just like the feeling of certain things being high. It wasn't like I'm depressed, so I'm gonna take this to make me feel better. It was kind of like, I'm feeling good, I'm gonna try this to see if I can feel even more better.
Nearly all addicted individuals believe at the beginning of their use of drugs or alcohol, they can stop using drugs on their own, and most try to stop without treatment. Although many people are successful, many refuse treatment. Many continue on the path of addiction until the attempts result in failure to achieve long-term abstinence. Consequently, many fall by the wayside, continuing on the road to complete substance dependence.
This is my 4th time in treatment, and the last times it didn't work for me because I chose for it not to work for me. I had this reservation in the back of my mind that someday, it was I had this obsession that one day I could control my using. I got involved with selling drugs for 5 different people, and it was a very scary lifestyle. I was, constantly looking over my shoulder in fear, and I had a lot of very close calls with the police. And about 4 years ago is when I found the drug ketamine, and for me, when I tried that, nothing seemed everything seemed okay when I tried it. And the sick part of my brain tells me that I can control a drug when I can't. That's what I am powerless over. Once I put something in my body, I can't stop. And when I found ketamine, I could not stop. And my disease turned from, just, using with people to me being alone in a room with a needle in my arm.
Everyone gets caught trying to, sell an illegal drug. I don't care who you are. Somewhere down the line, you're going to miss a step somewhere and someone's going to find out and you're just going to get caught.
The greatest consequence was when I got arrested in 2014 with 4 warrants for my arrest and that 3rd delivery of a lot of drugs to a police officer. I remember, I think the most defining moment in my recovery was when I was shackled and I went for my first court date, and I walk up to the judge and he looks at me and he says, "You'll do a minimum in the Illinois Department of Corrections of 10 years and a maximum of 45 years.
Understanding that addiction has such a fundamental biological component may help explain the difficulty of achieving and maintaining abstinence without treatment of some sort.
There's no question that treatment makes a big difference, and there are specific treatments that work better than others, although most studies find that those differences are small. So it depends on what the problem is, what the best treatment is. When I used to work with at-risk youth who were coming out of juvenile detention, one of the treatments that we used at that time was something called multisystematic therapy. You basically took the view that there were things that were broken in their social system at every level. There were problems in the family, there were problems in school, there were problems with socialization, there were problems with reading and development. That in order to successfully treat these kids, you had to address each one of those problems. You couldn't just say, we're going to treat their drug problem and they're going to be fine, because it was a multi-systematic problem. To a very great extent, at our young adult program at Promises Treatment Centers, we take a multi-systematic approach. Many of the kids that we see, in addition to having problems with drugs or alcohol, also have problems with depression and anxiety. And in fact, about half of the kids that we see who become addicted to opiates, like heroin or OxyContin, had problems with anxiety, school phobia, panic attacks, long before they ever started using drugs. In addition, because they start using drugs at such a young age, they never develop the normal social skills that are needed to enter adulthood. They don't know how to talk to adults. They don't know how to dress for work. They don't set their alarm to get up in the morning. They have very little discipline because they've never been shown and they never cultivated those habits.
I think at first it's really fun. I mean, because pretty much all the kids at the treatment center where I'm at have done drugs, and they talk about how at first it's really fun and it relieves a lot of stress. But then after a while, they realize that their problems are still there, and the problems just keep coming back and they keep occurring. And drugs really don't fix anything for them. If anything, it gives them more problems. So I understand why people turn to drugs, but at the end of the day, I don't think it's a solution for like the issues people are struggling with.
Many people are on meth, and I think that the reason it's so predominantly popular in Appalachia is a lot of people live below the poverty line there, and a lot of people don't have a lot of hope there because there's not a lot going on there. There's not a lot of community programs there to get people educated on not going down that path. There's not a lot of stuff to do, so people eventually will turn to doing drugs for something to do or to escape the reality that they're living in. And so I think that's why methamphetamine addiction in particular and opiate addiction is predominant among most of Appalachia.
If you're surrounded by drugs or alcohol, both in your family, your community, your friends group, and everyone around you is using drugs or drinking, whatever it may be, you may not know that there is another life for you. And I think the way you find that out is by having some positive influences. Even hopefully seeing something like this video could possibly influence someone seeing that there's other paths to life, looking on the TV and having people you admire. And I think that's what I realized in the rehab once it got to the point where some of the kids had hit rock bottom and ended up in rehab, and we started talking. And some of the counselors I worked with were former addicts themselves and residents of the program, and hearing their stories about how they rose above addiction, now have a life better than they could ever imagine. And they came from the same route, from the same place as some of these children, and they rose above it and now are way more fulfilled in their life. They have meaningful relationships, they have jobs that they care about, and they aren't living in fear of their life surrounded by gangs. So I think just having those positive role models can pull someone out of that cycle, but it's absolutely difficult when you can't go home to your own family without being triggered and have those temptations to use, and it's just normalized in your community.
When kids aren't cared for well, or there are lots of fights or parents using drugs, the risk of addiction goes up.
It's a hard job to stand up in the middle of a crowd of people that are all smoking cigarettes or that are all doing drugs, and they're telling you, come on, let's do it. Why won't you do it? If you don't have knowledge of yourself, there's no way you can stand up for yourself if you have no clue what you're standing for.
My work in social services in regards to families, I see a lot of drug abuse, and it's the parents. Sometimes it's the teenagers coping with something the parents are doing. Drug use brings about a lot of promiscuous behavior. It brings about a lot of theft to compensate for your need for the drug. You know, there's a lot of side effects that comes with drug abuse, just not drug abuse. Then people are sick, and so then like a lot of addicts sober up because they're sick, and then it's like the family that was affected by the actual addiction now have to be by your side while you heal. It's just a cycle of pain.
My nephew had to resuscitate her a couple of times, and she got put in drug rehab. And then, you know, she just could never really pull herself out of it. And, you know, we tried talking to her and telling her that her little boy needed her, and she knew, and she loved everyone. She had like a really big love for people, but the drugs just took over everything in her life, and she just couldn't stop. And, you know, the night that we lost her, she mixed too many different ones together, and it put her into cardiac arrest. And by the time anybody got to her, it was too late. And it, you know, dying at 26 years old and leaving a 4-year-old little boy and a husband behind is, you know, a pretty big deal. People, I don't think, realize what drugs do to families and to themselves. It just overpowers them at some point.
Intervention is not, you know, what you see on TV. It really isn't. You know, there are many different types of interventions, and an intervention is really, in my opinion, and my personal experience and professional experience, is really about creating an opportunity, a bridge, an opening, to find that opening for anybody, a young adult, an adult, to take the next step into the light, right? And to help them, even if they don't believe it. I mean, I was personally intervened on 20 years ago, and I didn't go into treatment because I wanted to go. I had no desire to be clean. But I think that, you know, if you can just find that small little space, that healthy part of every human being that actually doesn't want to live like that anymore, and if we can just access that and find it and help people to take the next step, that's what an intervention is. It's about changing their current, you know, creating a shift in their current perspective.
My best friend's dad was addicted to alcohol, and he couldn't stop. So we helped him. Actually, my family helped him, and we got him to start going to AAs, and he lived in our house for a couple of months until he got back on track, and he is doing really good today.
I led some of the group therapy sessions, and one of the sessions that we had, the topic was about self-esteem. And I forgot exactly how it went, but it was something like we went around the circle, and each person was supposed to say like 3 positive things about themselves, and if they couldn't think of something, like other people in the room would help them. And it was very upsetting to see that so many of them just really struggled with even saying one positive thing about themselves. They didn't have an identity outside of the drugs necessarily. All the things that they thought they were, outgoing, fun, like cool, that they started to realize once they were sober that was the drugs, and they don't even know who they are, and they don't know what parts of them to be proud of. And there's one girl in particular that I admired so much. She was so well-spoken, so strong. She had been through so much and was really progressing in her treatment. And when I asked her what's something that like you like about yourself, something that like you're good at, and she said, I think I'm a pretty good drawer. Or like a lot of girls were like, I've been told I'm pretty. So it wasn't anything deep down in them, like I'm strong, I'm motivated, I have done this, I've done that. It was more like shallow surface level things, and that was after pulling teeth to try to get out of them. So I think the link between self-esteem is that, the link between self-esteem and lack of self-esteem and drug usage is just that feeling of wanting to expand upon their personality, which they don't feel is good enough, that they need something more because they are not good enough themselves. They need some mind-altering substance to make them cool, make them interesting, make them exciting, make them more social. But if they find that inner strength and find love for themselves, then hopefully they won't need to outsource for that kind of feeling and self-esteem.
How long does drug addiction treatment usually last? Individuals progress through drug addiction treatment at various rates, so there is no predetermined length of treatment.
This is how I describe what we do in treatment, at least especially with chemical dependency. We really try to help people start to understand that there's an emotional life, and we get them to start riding the bike, if you will. Teach them how to ride the bike, how do you pedal, how do you start to balance. They're wobbly at first. And I always say to them that if you leave here and you stop pedaling, it's going to stop. Your momentum is going to stop. And I think what happens when people relapse is they start to feel things, they start to communicate things with people, And then something starts to shut them down. They worry about themselves. They worry about the reactions. They start going back into their own heads, and they stop. And when they stop, it builds up. It builds up to the point where it's like, I don't want to do this anymore. I can't feel this anymore. I've got to check out of myself.
Man, oh man. Just got high. I shot it.
Everyone relapses. I don't know one single heroin user that hasn't relapsed. I actually have this thing on my phone, if I can read it to you. All right, so this says, it says Recovery 101. It will be challenging. It will also be worth it. You will relapse, and that's okay, as long as you keep fighting. You may feel alone in your struggle. You will help others who are struggling. Your loved ones may not understand, but you can always explain. You will have good days and bad days, but the bad days will get fewer. Your problems won't magically go away, but they will be manageable. You might not feel different at first, but when you're done, you will be happier, healthier, stronger, and recovered. That's why you have to keep fighting.
Growing up, my mother was an alcoholic, and that led to a lot of things, a lot of bad things that happened within my family. My family was broken apart. So growing up with a parent with an addiction or an abusive parent can have a negative impact on you. But what I would tell kids who do have parents who have addiction problems or are abusive, I would say, if at all possible, let that have a positive impact on you. Let that show you who you never want to be. Let that show you to never even give that lifestyle a chance. Because while you may be able to manage it for a while you may be able to manage drinking and doing drugs and smoking and everything else, while you may be able to manage that for a while, that will eventually lead you down a path that you do not want to go. So I think for kids who have to go home every day to their drug-addicted parent or alcohol-addicted parent or abusive parent, just stick in, just stay in there. Try to help your parent, and use that as an experience to show you who you never want to be like.
My birth father, he was an alcoholic, and I just remember being super young and looking at him and be like, I never want to be that. I never want to be that person that comes home drunk every night, falling on the floor, yelling at my kids for no reason. And I think if you're that kid, just remember that you have a life ahead of you, and look at your parents and try to be better than them, because you can be, and you have so much potential. And don't think because your family is an alcoholic that you are going to be. And for the kids in high school too, just remember that there's life outside of high school, and there's life beyond getting high at parties in high school. That's really important, because I think a lot of kids in high school think high school's never going to end, but it is, and there's a huge future ahead of you, and you should not let high school affect you. Even if it runs in your family, like addictions, I don't believe that it runs in your family. I think somebody says, oh, well, it runs in my family, so I guess I'm going to get addicted too, and then they blame it on that. But no, you can change. You don't have to be the person in school that is selling the drugs, that is constantly hiding, that is on the run. Because if you know that what you're doing is wrong, then why even do it? Because it just doesn't make sense to put everything on the line for no good reason.
Does treatment work? Yes. It is a medical and psychological truth. People who get treatment and stick with it can stop using drugs and alcohol. They can, in fact, change their lives so they don't need to go back to using drugs or alcohol to deal with life on life's terms.
Generally, people have thoughts about what happens in the environment. Something happens to them and they have an automatic thought, which makes them feel, and then it makes them act in a certain way. And throughout the course of life, people start building these thoughts, and then they have something called core beliefs that really drive what they do on a day-to-day basis. And for a lot of kids who have experienced a lot of negative things, they have negative worldviews of life and how it is. And so as new things come up, they test these new experiences to old situations and old beliefs and old thought patterns. And usually how I work with them is I first help them tolerate any distress that it may cause. They have a lot of emotional distress from having experienced all these negative things. And then once they're able to tolerate it, we form new core beliefs about what the world is like, what they are like, and what the relationships could be like moving forward.
When I was younger, the hardest part about me getting sober was that I was like, I'm never going to be able to have fun again. And I've had more fun being sober than I ever have, getting high. And I've had so many awesome opportunities.
The way people recover is in community. That, it's a we thing. There's a saying in the program, I get loaded and we get clean together. So the idea was really to, if we can create a community and kind of keep people, keep our arms wrapped around them and create kind of the herd and keep people in the middle of the herd, that people's chances of success increased. And there was a level of accountability to each other.
The goal of treatment is to return people into productive functioning in the family, workplace, and community.
When I got out of jail, I still experienced this feeling of hopelessness because, my charges were extremely serious, and I never thought, that I would be able to do what I'm doing now. And I never thought I would actually even be able to get a job because of my past mistakes. And today it's like my life is filled with recovery and amazing people, and I'm already in my career path to doing what I want to be doing. I work with other recovering addicts, and I also am starting school again. And it's crazy to me, to think that, in 1 year of being out of jail, that I'm already doing what I hoped that I would be doing in, 5 years.
Addiction has one real problem, right? Drugs feel good. They work. When I feel like, and I don't want to feel what I'm feeling, and I get drunk or I do some coke, I feel great after. And for a while I can pretend everything's fine. That's how it starts. It's basic conditioning that says, hey, something's going on that you don't like, you take something, whatever you didn't like is done. Very simple. Of course you learn, hey, that's a really good way to solve my problems. I just take this or I do that and I'm fine. And so you dive into this cycle, and then I see actually 4 things that happen after that. And most of them happen right here in front of our eyes. The first thing, and this is my favorite phase with clients here, is what I see the phase. Clients say, you took away my coping skills. You took away my marijuana, you took away my cutting, you took away my protection, and you're the asshole for it. So there's a lot of aggression, a lot of feelings that are underneath that finally come out, And then once they realize that it's I just want to get back to my coping skills, they say, look, they actually really didn't work. Once they realize that, slowly, by seeing how aggressive they are, by seeing how out of control they are, they go to the next phase, which I see as the if-then phase. They say, well, if you give me this, then I'll be happy. If you let me do that, then I'll be open. If you just say that I can smoke again sometime, then I'll be calmer, So that negotiating phase is also a very, very beautiful phase, because when they do it 100 times in a row, they realize that it's a pattern, that it's I'm constantly reaching, I'm still reaching for something to get some sort of need met. The next step, this is, I think I said maybe the other one's my favorite, but this is maybe my real favorite, is when they go to, okay, well, I'm stuck here. Either my parents sent me here, or I wanted to check in here, but I'm now kind of, there's so much going on, but I'm stuck here, right? What can I learn from this? What can I learn from this? I'm standing in front of a wall, what can I learn about the wall? And all of a sudden, when they dive in and start asking questions, like, hey, what can I actually learn? They really start asking and answering questions that they never dared ask before. A big one that often comes up here is, hey, do I have to hate myself because I'm bisexual? Or is it just the world outside that taught me that? Or am I an asshole because I'm often angry? Or am I angry because I'm protecting myself? And these questions, when you get to that phase, it's beautiful, you know, when they really, really start working. When they're saying, hey, what's the next question I can ask? What's the next thing I can do? All of a sudden, every group becomes like an opportunity for them. You know, and then I love this phase because then they reflect back on the phase and say, ha, I remember when I just spent this whole group yelling at you. And now I'm actually like learning. And I'm actually seeing other clients still yelling at you. And I'm laughing inside because I know what they feel like. You know, that's another, when the real group dynamics start happening. It's beautiful for me. Then the fourth one is really, it's a little bit sad for me, this phase, because it's a sign that the client's basically ready to go and we'll soon have to part ways. So it's sad for me, but it's beautiful because they see that our whole experience comes down to 4 basic emotions. You know, you can be sad, bad, mad, or glad. And bad, of course, also includes guilt or feelings of disgust. But all those 4 basic coordinates, sad, bad, or guilty, or disgusted, mad, I'm angry, or glad, I'm just happy. They can feel all those 4 things, and they can live in each of those feelings without, oh, I'm feeling anxious, oh, let me do something. Or I'm angry, somebody needs to be punched. Or I'm glad and, well, let me get drunk and I'll be even happier. You know, they just learn that all 4 basic directions of emotions are okay and a part of human experience.